blood pooled beneath Colonel Elijah Freeman as federal agents stormed the scene, weapons drawn. FBI. Weapons down. The white officer who had fired without warning now trembled. Moments earlier, this decorated black soldier had only been delivering a birthday gift to his daughter. Before we dive into this shocking story of injustice, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe to support real stories that need to be told. What would you do if you witnessed a police officer drawing a weapon on an innocent person? Stick around to see how one moment of racial profiling changed everything for a military hero and exposed a nationwide conspiracy. Colonel Elijah Freeman woke before his alarm at precisely 0500 hours, a habit formed over 28 years of military service. The morning sunlight filtered through the blinds of his modest Arlington apartment, casting golden stripes across the polished surface of the vintage writing desk he had spent 6 months restoring. Today was Trinity's 23rd birthday, and the antique mahogany desk represented more than just a gift. To Elijah, it symbolized everything he had fought to provide for his daughter: stability, opportunity, and a connection to their family history. The desk had belonged to his grandfather, one of the first black attorneys in their hometown of Memphis. Running his fingers along the smooth wooden surface, Elijah smiled, thinking of how Trinity would appreciate its history now that she was in her second year at Georgetown Law. His daughter had inherited his precise mind and her mother Vanessa's fierce compassion. The thought of Vanessa brought the familiar ache in his chest. 3 years since cancer took her. And some mornings he still reached across the bed expecting to find her there. She would be so proud of Trinity, he whispered to the empty room. Elijah's military career had been distinguished by any standard. From his graduation near the top of his West Point class to his current position overseeing sensitive military intelligence operations as lieutenant colonel, he had navigated the often complicated terrain of being a black man in America's military hierarchy. There had been the expected challenges, the subtle questioning of his qualifications, the occasional surprised look when he entered a room full of white officers, the extra scrutiny his work received. But Elijah had persevered, exceeding every standard set before him. His latest assignment had been particularly demanding, a classified report examining coordination between military bases and local police departments, with special attention to racial disparities and how service members of color were treated when off base. The findings had been troubling enough that his commanding general had taken the unusual step of forwarding the report directly to the Department of Defense and FBI for further investigation. Elijah carefully secured his dress uniform, medals precisely arranged according to regulation, though it wasn't required for a birthday visit. Trinity had always loved seeing him in full military dress. "My superhero," she had called him since childhood. Those simple words had sustained him through 3 combat deployments and countless hardships. After Vanessa's death, Trinity had urged him to consider retirement, worried about the toll his work took on him, but Elijah couldn't imagine life outside the structure and purpose the Army provided. Besides, his current role allowed him to address systemic issues that had concerned him throughout his career. The drive from Arlington to Westlake Pines would take approximately 45 minutes, traffic permitting. He had mapped the route carefully, as he did everything in life. The suburban community where Trinity shared an apartment with 2 classmates was known for its exclusivity and wealth. It was also known, though less officially, for its racial homogeneity. Elijah had visited only twice before, both times noting the subtle shift in atmosphere as he crossed into the neighborhood. The feeling was familiar to him, the sensation of being watched, evaluated, considered out of place until proven otherwise. As a black boy growing up in South Memphis, he had learned to fear police, not trust them. His own father had drilled into him strict rules for survival: hands visible at all times, no sudden movements, yes sir and no sir regardless of how you're spoken to. It had been those very fears that had partially motivated his military service. In uniform, he had hoped to find respect that civilian clothes didn't always afford him. And largely, Within the military structure he had. But crossing into certain communities still triggered that childhood wariness. Before loading the desk into his truck, Elijah performed one final inspection. The restoration had been meticulous, from repairing the water damage on the right drawer to polishing the original brass hardware to a warm glow. Inside the largest drawer, he had inscribed a message to Trinity, "From those who paved your way, to you who will pave the way for others." Elijah checked his watch. 0730. Perfect timing to arrive just as Trinity would be finishing her morning study session. She was unaware of his visit, believing her gift would arrive by courier later that day. The surprise would make the gesture even more special. As he crossed the Potomac and headed toward the affluent Virginia suburbs, Elijah's military instincts prickled. Something felt wrong today. A sensation he had learned to trust during his deployments. Brushing it aside as simple anxiety about entering Westlake Pines, he focused on Trinity's face, imagining her surprise and joy. The community's entrance was marked by an ornate stone sign and meticulous landscaping. Immediately after passing it, Elijah noticed a police cruiser pull onto the road behind him. A coincidence? Surely. But when the cruiser followed his turn onto Maple Avenue, then again onto Lakeview Drive, the familiar tension returned to his shoulders. He checked his speedometer, exactly at the limit. His registration and insurance were current, his driving impeccable. There was no legitimate reason for police interest. Yet the cruiser remained, 2 car lengths behind, neither passing nor falling back. Elijah took a deep breath, recalling the countless times he had prepared Trinity for interactions with law enforcement. Stay calm, stay respectful. But know your rights, he had told her since she was old enough to understand. Now, approaching her apartment complex, he would need to follow his own advice. Officer Scott Larson began his patrol of Westlake Pines with the confidence of a man who considered himself the primary guardian of an exclusive sanctuary. At 34, Larson had spent 12 years with the Westlake Pines Police Department, having joined immediately after his dishonorable discharge from the Army. That particular detail was conveniently omitted from his official biography on the department website, which instead highlighted his military background, without specifics. The truth, buried in sealed records, involved racial harassment of fellow soldiers and insubordination. Larson's morning had started with the usual briefing, followed by a series of messages from the neighborhood's unofficial but highly active Community Watch system. The private social media group had become his personal intelligence network, with affluent residents eagerly reporting anything they deemed suspicious. This morning's alerts included 3 separate reports about a suspicious black male in a pickup truck with something large in the back. The messages carried the unmistakable subtext that Larson had come to recognize: "This person doesn't belong here." Dispatch: "I'm checking on a suspicious vehicle reported by multiple residents." Larson spoke into his radio, already scanning for Colonel Freeman's truck. "Black male driving through Lakeview section, possibly casing houses." The dispatcher's voice crackled back. "Any traffic violations or observed criminal activity, Officer Larson?" Larson's jaw tightened. "Not yet. But you know how these situations typically develop. I'll keep you updated." The exchange reflected an unspoken understanding within the department about Westlake Pines' desired community character. The suburb had been established in the 1960s as an exclusive enclave, and while no laws explicitly maintained its demographic homogeneity, the combination of property values, homeowners association rules, and vigilant policing achieved the same effect. In his dozen years with the department, Larson had developed a reputation for being particularly attentive to outsiders. His personnel file contained 5 complaints of racial profiling, all dismissed after internal review. 2 had been filed by black service members visiting family in the community. This connection was not coincidental. Westlake Pines bordered a commercial area where many military families shopped, occasionally bringing them through the community. These visitors were frequent targets of the neighborhood watch alerts. As Larson followed Freeman's truck at a careful distance, he observed everything about the vehicle and driver with practiced scrutiny. The truck was clean and well maintained, not the profile of typical, suspicious vehicles. The black man behind the wheel sat with unusually straight posture, his movements precise and controlled as he signaled and turned. Most telling was the military haircut visible in profile. Larson's radio crackled again. "Officer Larson, be advised we're receiving additional calls about the truck. Apparently it's turning onto Canterbury Road now." Larson smiled thinly. "Already on it. Following now." Inside his truck, Colonel Freeman was increasingly aware of the patrol car tracking his movements. His military training had heightened his situational awareness, and 3 identical turns confirmed this was no coincidence. He considered his options. Pulling over voluntarily might defuse the situation, but it would also legitimize surveillance that had no legal basis. Continuing to Trinity's apartment was the original plan, but he now worried about leading police to his daughter's home. The tension between his military instinct to confront challenges directly and his lifetime experience as a black man counseling caution created a familiar internal conflict. Trinity, meanwhile, was arranging her study materials on her kitchen table, completely unaware of the situation developing just blocks away. She had planned a small celebration with friends that evening, but was using the morning for focused preparation for upcoming exams. Her roommates had already left for classes, leaving the apartment quiet except for the soft classical music she played while studying. She paused momentarily, thinking about her father and wondering what gift he might have sent for her birthday. Their bond had grown even stronger after her mother's death, though his military duties often kept them physically apart. Trinity checked her phone, smiling at the simple, "Happy birthday" text he had sent at exactly midnight. Typical of her father, punctual, understated, reliable. What she couldn't know was that he was now turning into her apartment complex's visitor parking area, with Officer Larson's patrol car still trailing behind. The exclusive apartment community, marketed to graduate students and young professionals from wealthy families, featured manicured grounds and security gates that residents like Trinity took for granted. Colonel Freeman carefully parked his truck in the designated visitor space, maintaining his military composure while acutely aware of the patrol car now stopping at an angle behind him, effectively blocking his exit. Freeman turned off his engine and placed both hands on the steering wheel, visible and still. In his rearview mirror, he saw Officer Larson exit his vehicle, hand resting on his holstered weapon. Freeman's combat-trained instincts assessed multiple scenarios in seconds, but his life experience as a black man in America narrowed his options to one: complete compliance with whatever came next, regardless of its legality or fairness. The security cameras positioned throughout the parking area offered his only reassurance. At least there would be a record of whatever transpired. Inside her apartment, Trinity approached her window, drawn by the flashing lights now visible in the parking lot below. Her law school training had already sensitized her to issues of police procedure and civil rights, making her instantly alert to any police activity. What she saw sent a chill through her body. A police officer approaching a truck that looked exactly like her father's, hand hovering near his weapon. She grabbed her phone and keys, moving toward her door with growing alarm. In the parking lot, the confrontation that would change multiple lives was about to begin. Officer Larson activated his cruiser's lights, but deliberately left the siren silent as he positioned his vehicle to block Colonel Freeman's truck. This tactic, not taught in police academy but common in Westlake Pines, created the appearance of a traffic stop without the documentation of full lights and siren activation would require in the department's automated systems. Approaching with his right hand resting on his holstered weapon, Larson maintained what he considered a commanding presence. "License and registration," he demanded without introduction or explanation, standing slightly behind the driver's side window to maintain tactical advantage. Colonel Freeman remained perfectly still, hands visible at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel. Good morning, officer, he responded in a measured tone developed through decades of military discipline. May I ask why I've been stopped? I haven't committed any traffic violations. Larson's expression hardened at the question. We've had reports of suspicious activity in the area. What's your business here? Freeman kept his breathing steady, recalling the countless times he had rehearsed such interactions, both personally and with Trinity. I'm delivering a birthday gift to my daughter. She lives in this complex. The skepticism on Larson's face was immediate and unmistakable. Your daughter lives here? In Westlake Gardens? The emphasis on your carried unmistakable meaning. Freeman felt the familiar burn of indignation but maintained his composed exterior. Yes, sir. Apartment 312. She's a second-year law student at Georgetown. Larson's radio crackled. And a second patrol car pulled into the lot. Officer Kevin Reeves, younger and newer to the department, approached cautiously. Everything okay here, Scott? Reeves asked, glancing between his colleague and the black man in the truck. Just establishing why this gentleman is in our community, Larson replied, emphasizing our in a way that clearly excluded Freeman. Claims his daughter lives here. Freeman noticed several residents watching from windows and balconies. Two had phones raised, apparently recording the interaction. Another patrol officer stopping to assist with a simple inquiry reinforced his growing certainty that this was racial profiling, pure and simple. Sir, I'm Lieutenant Colonel Elijah Freeman. United States Army, he stated calmly. I'm happy to provide my military identification if that would help resolve any concerns. Larson's posture shifted subtly at the mention of military rank. Military ID isn't valid for traffic stops. I need your driver's license. Freeman nodded. I understand, officer. My license is in my wallet, in my right back pocket. I'm going to move my right hand very slowly to retrieve it. Is that acceptable? The deliberate nature of Freeman's movements and questions reflected years of conditioning on how black men must behave during police encounters to maximize their chances of survival. Larson nodded curtly, and Freeman proceeded with exaggerated slowness to retrieve his wallet. As he extracted his license, a military ID became visible in the wallet's transparent window. Officer Reeves noticed it and the name. Freeman? Wait, are you related to Trinity Freeman? Before Colonel Freeman could answer, Trinity's voice called from across the parking lot. Dad! What's happening? She rushed toward the truck but was immediately intercepted by Officer Larson. Ma'am, please stay back. This is a police matter. Trinity's law school training immediately kicked in. This is my father. Why have you stopped him? What's the reasonable suspicion or probable cause? Larson's expression darkened at the legal terminology. We're conducting an investigation based on multiple reports of suspicious activity. Trinity stood her ground. What specific suspicious activity? My father is delivering my birthday present. The gathering audience of residents had grown, with more phones recording the escalating situation. Freeman remained motionless in his vehicle, acutely aware that any movement could be misinterpreted, especially with his daughter now involved. Officer, Freeman said carefully, as you can see. This is indeed my daughter, confirming my stated purpose for being here. The gift I mentioned is visible in the truck bed, a restored antique desk. May I now proceed with my legitimate business? Larson seemed caught off guard by the calm rationality and the growing number of witnesses. Officer Reeves shifted uncomfortably beside him. Scott, seems pretty straightforward, he muttered. Larson ignored his colleague and focused on Freeman's military ID, still visible in the wallet. Lieutenant Colonel? What's your assignment? Something in his tone suggested this question wasn't routine. Freeman hesitated briefly before answering. I'm currently assigned to intelligence operations at the Pentagon. Specifically interagency coordination. A flash of recognition crossed Larson's face. Intelligence? Wouldn't happen to be involved in that joint task force reviewing police departments, would you? The question hung in the air, loaded with implication. Freeman maintained his composure, though internally his tactical assessment of the situation shifted dramatically. How would a patrol officer know about a classified military review? I'm not at liberty to discuss specific assignments, officer. The radio on Larson's shoulder crackled again. Unit 3. Status update on your stop at Westlake Gardens? Larson keyed his radio. Still investigating. Subject claims military affiliation. Running checks now. He returned his attention to Freeman. Step out of the vehicle, please. Trinity immediately protested. That's not necessary. He's identified himself and explained his presence. Larson turned to her sharply. Interfere with police business, and you'll be detained as well, Georgetown law or not. Freeman recognized the dangerous escalation. Trinity, please step back. Everything will be fine. He turned to Larson. I'll comply, officer, but I want to note that I believe this stop lacks legal basis. I'd like to speak with a supervisor. Larson's hand moved closer to his weapon. Out. Now. Have you ever witnessed racial profiling firsthand? Comment number 1 if you've seen police treat people differently based on their race. Or number 2 if you believe these incidents are isolated. Like and subscribe if you want to see justice served in situations like this. As Colonel Freeman reaches for his door handle. What do you think Officer Larson is really afraid of? Is it the man before him, or the truth he represents? Stay with us as this confrontation reaches its breaking point and reveals a conspiracy bigger than anyone expected. Colonel Freeman complied with Officer Larson's demand. Opening his door with deliberate slowness and stepping out with the disciplined movements ingrained through decades of military service. Standing at attention beside his truck, Freeman presented an imposing figure in his immaculate civilian clothes, his military bearing unmistakable despite the absence of a uniform. Sir, I'm going to ask you one more time about your involvement with any investigations into police departments, Larson pressed, his hand still hovering near his weapon. The parking lot had grown quieter. The gathering audience of residents sensing the dangerous undercurrent in what should have been a routine interaction. Freeman maintained his composed expression while rapidly assessing the situation. The officer's specific knowledge about classified work suggested connections to something larger than simple racial profiling. Officer Larson, Freeman noted the name from the badge. I've identified myself and my purpose here. My daughter has confirmed my statements. There's no legal basis to continue this detention. Officer Reeves shifted his weight nervously, glancing at the growing number of recording phones. Scott, maybe we should just let him deliver the desk and go. Everything checks out. Larson shot his partner a warning look before turning back to Freeman. Spread your legs, hands on the vehicle. I'm conducting a search for officer safety. Trinity, still being held back several feet away, protested loudly. That's illegal. You have no probable cause for a search. Several onlookers murmured in agreement, their phones still recording. Freeman maintained his composure. Officer, I do not consent to a search. I respectfully request your supervisor's presence before this proceeds further. Larson's radio crackled again with the dispatcher's voice. Unit 3, be advised we have calls coming in about your stop at Westlake Gardens. Captain Burton is asking for an update. This public acknowledgement of scrutiny seemed to further agitate Larson. Tell Captain I've got potential interference with the Westlake Initiative. Subject has military intelligence connections. The cryptic reference to a Westlake Initiative raised Freeman's internal alarms further. Whatever was happening went beyond typical racial profiling. Trinity had managed to edge closer, her law student mind cataloging every procedural violation. Dad, I'm recording everything. Don't worry. Larson turned toward her sharply. Back away now. This is a potential threat situation. Freeman felt his military comms slipping at the implied threat to his daughter. Officer, my daughter is not involved in this. Please focus your attention on me. As he spoke, Freeman noticed a subtle shift in Larson's stance, a tensing that his combat experience recognized as preparation for action. Nearby, the antique desk sat in the truck bed, its polished surface reflecting the morning sunlight. The gift that was meant to celebrate Trinity's academic achievements had instead become the backdrop for a dangerous confrontation. "Last warning," Larson said, his voice dropping to a dangerous register. "Hands on the vehicle now, or you'll be charged with resisting." Freeman slowly began to comply, placing his hands on the truck's hood, when Trinity suddenly gasped. "Dad, your arm! You're bleeding!" Freeman glanced down to see a thin line of blood trickling from beneath his sleeve, where his watch had scratched him during the tense interaction. The movement was slight, just a momentary glance, but it was enough. Larson's hand moved to his weapon with practiced speed. "He's reaching!" "Gun!" Officer Reeves shouted in confusion. "What gun? I don't see anything." The residents recording the scene gasped collectively as Larson drew his service weapon and aimed it directly at Freeman. Time seemed to slow for Colonel Freeman, combat instincts immediately calculating angles and options. The veteran of 3 war zones recognized he was in the most dangerous moment of his life, not in Afghanistan or Iraq, but in an upscale American suburb. Trinity screamed, lurching forward instinctively to protect her father. Freeman's only thought was for her safety. "Trinity, stay back!" he commanded in his military voice, moving his body to place himself between his daughter and the drawn weapon. Larson interpreted the movement as aggression. "Don't move," he shouted, finger tensing on the trigger. In that frozen moment, multiple witnesses would later recall the absolute control in Freeman's voice as he addressed his daughter while staring down the barrel of a gun. "Trinity, remember Protocol Bravo 7. Call the number." The reference meant nothing to the officers or onlookers, but Trinity's eyes widened in recognition. Freeman had prepared her for this possibility, had given her emergency contacts within his military command structure years ago. One of the residents, a middle-aged white woman who had been recording since the beginning, suddenly stepped forward. "This is wrong. He hasn't done anything." Her intervention created a momentary distraction, and Larson's focus shifted for a split second. That's when it happened. The sound of the gunshot echoed across the parking lot, followed immediately by Trinity's anguished scream. Colonel Elijah Freeman, decorated combat veteran with 28 years of service to his country, fell to the pavement of Westlake Gardens Apartments, blood immediately spreading across his chest. Larson stood frozen, his weapon still extended, a look of shock replacing his previous aggression. Officer Reeves rushed forward, radio already in hand. "Shots fired. Officer involved shooting at Westlake Gardens. Need immediate medical assistance." The residents who had been recording now surged forward, phones capturing every detail of the aftermath. Trinity broke through the confusion, dropping to her knees beside her father. "Dad! Dad, stay with me." Freeman's military training allowed him to remain conscious despite the shock and pain. His eyes found his daughter's. "Trinity," he whispered, "the desk. The second drawer has a false bottom. They know about the report." Larson had recovered enough to approach, attempting to pull Trinity away. "Ma'am, step back from the suspect." The word suspect ignited Trinity's fury through her tears. "Suspect? This is a decorated lieutenant colonel who is bringing me a birthday present." Residents surrounded the scene, their collective outrage palpable. One man stepped forward, his expression grim. "I've called the FBI. I'm a federal prosecutor, and this is clearly a civil rights violation." Larson's face paled at the mention of the FBI. "This is local police jurisdiction. There's no federal involvement here." But Freeman, despite his injury, managed a slight smile. "You're wrong, officer," he said through clenched teeth. "Federal jurisdiction began the moment you accessed classified information about my work." The wail of approaching sirens filled the air as Freeman's consciousness began to fade. His last clear thought before darkness claimed him was of the antique desk in his truck. The gift held more than just family history. It contained the evidence that would expose everything. Blood seeped through Colonel Freeman's light blue button-down shirt, creating an expanding crimson circle against the fabric as he lay on the sun-warmed asphalt of the parking lot. Trinity pressed her hands against the wound, her law textbooks never having prepared her for the warm, slick reality of her father's blood coating her fingers. "Someone help him," she screamed, her voice cracking with desperation. Around them, the scene had erupted into controlled chaos. Officer Reeves had taken over emergency response, calling for an ambulance while checking Freeman's vital signs with shaking hands. "Stay with us, sir," he urged, genuine concern evident in his voice. "Ambulance is 3 minutes out." Officer Larson stood several feet away, his service weapon now holstered but his hand still resting on it defensively as he surveyed the growing crowd of residents. "Everyone needs to step back. This is an active crime scene." His attempt to assert authority was met with open hostility from the witnesses. "The only crime here is what you just did," shouted the woman who had stepped forward moments before the shooting. She continued recording with her phone held high. "I got everything. From the moment you pulled up behind him without cause." Other residents nodded in agreement, their phones also capturing every detail. The federal prosecutor who had identified himself earlier approached Larson directly. "Officer, I strongly advise you to secure your weapon and wait for federal authorities. I've already contacted the U.S. Attorney's Office and the FBI field office." Larson's face flushed with anger. "This is a local police matter. You have no jurisdiction here." The prosecutor remained calm. "Civil rights violations are explicitly federal jurisdiction. And shooting a military officer without cause certainly qualifies." Trinity had begun reciting her father's military service number and security clearance level into her phone, following emergency protocols he had established years ago. Between desperate attempts to slow the bleeding, she provided precise details about his Pentagon position and the name of his commanding general. The specificity of her information drew Larson's attention. "What are you doing? Who are you calling?" he demanded, moving toward her. Multiple residents immediately stepped between them, phones recording his approach. "Don't you dare go near her," one man warned. "You've done enough damage." The wail of sirens grew louder, and within moments emergency medical technicians rushed into the parking lot, equipment in hand. They moved efficiently, gently moving Trinity aside to access Freeman's wound. GSW to the upper left chest, patient conscious but tachycardic, one reported clinically, attaching monitoring equipment. BP dropping 90/60 and falling. Trinity stood nearby, blood covering her hands and shirt, her legal mind documenting every detail despite her emotional devastation. "His name is Lieutenant Colonel Elijah Freeman, Pentagon Intelligence Division," she told the medics. "He has no allergies to medications and no pre-existing conditions." The professional calm in her voice belied the tears streaming down her face. As the medics worked to stabilize Freeman, a new wave of sirens announced the arrival of more police vehicles. Captain Harold Burton, commander of the Westlake Pines Police Department, emerged from an unmarked car, his expression thunderous as he surveyed the scene. "Larson! Report now!" he barked, moving away from the gathering crowd and gesturing for his officer to follow. Their intense conversation, though conducted in hushed tones, was closely observed by the witnesses. Officer Reeves approached Trinity, genuine remorse evident in his expression. "Ms. Freeman, I'm so sorry this happened. I want you to know I'll provide a complete statement about what I witnessed." She nodded numbly, her attention focused on the medical team working on her father. One of the EMTs looked up with urgency. "We need to transport immediately. His pressure's still dropping." As they prepared to move Freeman onto a stretcher, his eyes fluttered open, finding Trinity in the crowd. "The desk," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Protect the desk." She nodded. Understanding the significance of his antique gift went far beyond sentimental value. "I will, Dad. I promise." The crowd parted as the medics wheeled Freeman toward the ambulance. Trinity moved to follow, but Captain Burton intercepted her. "Ms. Freeman, we'll need your statement about what happened here." Before she could respond, the federal prosecutor intervened. "She'll provide statements to the appropriate authorities once her father is stabilized. And I strongly suggest you focus on securing Officer Larson's weapon and badge in the meantime." Burton's expression darkened. "This is still my jurisdiction until proven otherwise." The prosecutor smiled thinly. "That proof is approximately 2 minutes out." As if on cue, 3 black SUVs with government plates entered the parking area, moving with coordinated precision. Men and women in suits emerged, their movements disciplined and purposeful. The lead vehicle stopped directly in front of Captain Burton, and a woman in her 40s stepped out, badge already extended. Special Agent Diane Chin, Federal Bureau of Investigation. "This scene is now under federal jurisdiction." Burton sputtered in protest, but Chin continued with calm authority. "We're investigating civil rights violations and potential illegal access of classified military intelligence. Officer Larson needs to surrender his weapon and communications devices immediately." The stunned silence that followed was broken by the sound of the ambulance doors closing with Freeman inside. Trinity approached Agent Chin. "My father needs to be taken to Walter Reed Military Hospital, not the local emergency room. He has a security clearance that requires specific protocols." Chen nodded. "Already arranged, MS?" Freeman. "Our agents will escort the ambulance." She turned to one of her colleagues. "Agent Rivera, please accompany Ms. Freeman to the hospital. Ensure Colonel Freeman's security at all times." As Trinity prepared to leave, she pointed to her father's truck. "The antique desk in the truck bed is evidence. My father indicated it contains something important related to his work." Chin immediately dispatched 2 agents to secure the vehicle. "Full evidence protocols. Nothing gets touched without documentation. Officer Larson," watching these developments from beside his patrol car, suddenly made a move toward his vehicle. 2 FBI agents intercepted him immediately. "Sir, place your hands on the vehicle. You're being detained pending investigation." Larson's face contorted with rage. "You can't do this. I was responding to a threat situation." Agent Chin approached him directly. "Officer Scott Larson, we have reason to believe you accessed classified information regarding Colonel Freeman's work before this encounter. That alone is a federal offense." The color drained from Larson's face. "I don't know what you're talking about." Chen's expression remained impassive. "Your radio communications referenced the Westlake Initiative and Colonel Freeman's intelligence work. Information you shouldn't have had access to." As Larson was secured in handcuffs, the residents who had witnessed the entire incident broke into spontaneous applause. The woman who had first intervened approached Agent Chin. "I have the entire incident recorded. From the moment he pulled up behind the colonel without cause." Chen nodded gratefully. "We'll need statements from all witnesses. My team will collect contact information." Trinity, now seated in an FBI vehicle preparing to follow the ambulance, looked back at the scene with a mixture of anguish and determination. Her father had been shot simply for existing in a space where some believed he didn't belong. But his careful planning, his military foresight, had ensured that this incident would not be buried like so many others. As the vehicles pulled away, Trinity clutched her phone with her father's blood still drying on her hands. The call she had made following Protocol Bravo 7 had set in motion forces that even Westlake Pines Police Department couldn't stop. Her father had anticipated this day might come. The antique desk, now under FBI protection, would reveal exactly how much he had prepared. The Walter Reed National Military Medical Center hummed with tightly controlled activity as Special Agent Diane Chin strode through the secure wing, her badge clearing the way through multiple checkpoints. 4 days had passed since Colonel Freeman's shooting, and the case had expanded far beyond an isolated incident of racial profiling. Trinity Freeman sat beside her father's hospital bed, her law textbook stacked neatly on the side table alongside legal pads filled with meticulous notes. She had barely left the room since Freeman had emerged from surgery to remove the bullet that had narrowly missed his heart. "Ms. Freeman," Chin greeted her, "how is the Colonel today?" Trinity looked up, the dark circles under her eyes testament to her vigilance. "The doctors say he's stabilizing. They're reducing his sedation this morning." Chen nodded, placing a supportive hand briefly on Trinity's shoulder before turning her attention to the uniformed military police officer stationed outside the door. "Any unusual activity to report?" The MP stood at attention. "No, ma'am. Security protocols remain in effect. All visitors verified against authorized list." Chin entered the room fully, closing the door behind her. "Trinity, we need to discuss what we found in the desk." Freeman stirred at these words, his military training allowing him to surface from sedation with remarkable speed. "Agent Chen," he acknowledged, his voice raspy but clear. "About time you got here." Both women moved to his bedside, Trinity reaching for his hand. "Dad, you should rest," the doctor said. Freeman shook his head slightly. "Later. This is more important." He focused on Chen with the intensity that had marked his military career. "The microfilm in the false bottom of the second drawer. You found it?" Chen nodded, pulling a chair close to his bed and lowering her voice. "Yes, Colonel. And I understand now why Officer Larson was so interested in your work. The evidence you gathered is extensive." Trinity looked between them, pieces falling into place. "The report you were working on at the Pentagon. It wasn't just about military-police coordination, was it?" Freeman managed a small smile despite his pain. "No, Trinity. For the past 3 years, I've been documenting systematic targeting of black military personnel by police departments near bases across the country. What happened to me was not random." Chin opened a secure tablet, entering multiple passwords before continuing. "Colonel Freeman's report identified a pattern of harassment, unlawful stops, and excessive force against military personnel of color, particularly in affluent communities surrounding bases and Pentagon facilities." She turned the tablet to show Trinity a map with dozens of red markers. "Each of these represents a documented incident. Your father created secure channels for service members to report these encounters confidentially." Trinity's legal mind immediately grasped the implications. A class-action civil rights case. This could change everything about how we address systemic racism in policing. Freeman nodded slightly. That was the goal. But somewhere along the line, our internal communications were compromised. Certain police departments, including Westlake Pines, were getting advance warning about service members who had filed reports. Chin picked up the thread. "Which explains why Officer Larson knew about your father's work and was specifically watching for him. The so-called Westlake Initiative appears to be a coordinated effort to intimidate military whistleblowers and their families." Trinity's expression hardened with determination. "That's why you created Protocol Bravo 7. You anticipated being targeted yourself." Freeman's eyes held a mixture of sadness and pride. "I hoped it would never be necessary. But yes, I established emergency procedures with my commanding general and the FBI Civil Rights Division. If I was ever detained under suspicious circumstances, you were to make that call immediately." Chen's tablet pinged with an encrypted notification. The FBI search of Officer Larson's home just turned up something significant. Multiple burner phones and a laptop containing communications with police officers in 6 other jurisdictions surrounding military installations. She looked directly at Freeman. "Your shot in the dark hit the target, Colonel. This goes well beyond Westlake Pines." The hospital room door opened after a brief knock, revealing a tall man in an Army general's uniform. "Lieutenant Colonel Freeman," he said formally before breaking into a warm smile. "Still causing trouble, I see." Freeman attempted to straighten in his bed despite his injury. "General Washington. Thank you for coming." The general approached the bed, his presence commanding respect even in the hospital setting. When my best intelligence officer gets shot by local police, I make it a priority. He turned to Trinity, extending his hand. You must be Trinity. Your father speaks of you constantly. She shook his hand, recognizing the name from her father's stories. General Washington. You were the one who authorized the original investigation? Washington nodded grimly. After the third incident involving one of our officers of color, it became clear this was systematic. Your father volunteered to lead the investigation, despite the personal risk. He turned back to Freeman. Which brings me to why I'm here. The Secretary of Defense has authorized Operation Clear Shield, effective immediately. We're expanding your investigation into a full joint task force with the FBI and Civil Rights Division. Freeman's eyes widened slightly. That quickly? Washington's expression was solemn. You getting shot on camera changed everything, Elijah. There's no burying this now. Agent Chin consulted her tablet again. Captain Burton of Westlake Pines Police has been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. We've identified emails linking him directly to the harassment campaign against reporting service members. Trinity had been taking notes throughout the conversation. Her legal training never far from the surface. What about Officer Larson? Will he face federal charges? Chen nodded firmly. Multiple charges. Civil rights violations. Assault on military personnel, unauthorized access to classified information, and conspiracy. The U.S. Attorney is personally overseeing the case. Freeman closed his eyes briefly. The conversation taxing his limited strength. The desk, he murmured. There's more. The letters in the top drawer lining. Washington and Chin exchanged glances. We found them. The general confirmed. Personal accounts from 27 service members detailing similar experiences. All authenticated and admissible. Trinity squeezed her father's hand. You've been planning this for years. Freeman opened his eyes, meeting his daughter's gaze. I promised your mother I would create a safer world for you. This was the only way I knew how. Have you noticed how often justice depends on someone with power fighting back? Comment number 1 if you believe Freeman was brave to document these abuses. Or number 2 if you think he put himself at unnecessary risk. Like and subscribe if you believe we need more people willing to stand up against systemic injustice. Trinity has just discovered her father's true mission, but the danger isn't over. What happens when those who abuse their power realize they've been exposed? Stay with us to discover how deep this conspiracy goes and who else might be involved. 3 weeks after the shooting, Colonel Freeman sat upright in a conference room at FBI headquarters. His military posture maintained despite the healing wound in his chest. The antique desk that had been intended as Trinity's birthday gift now occupied a place of honor in the evidence room. Its secret compartments having yielded far more than anyone initially suspected. Trinity, now working as a special liaison between the FBI Civil Rights Division and the Military Task Force, entered the room with a stack of folders and a determined expression. Dad, the analysis of Officer Larson's digital communications just came back. You were right about the network. Freeman nodded. Unsurprised. How many departments are implicated? Trinity placed the top folder before him, opening it to reveal a map with red markers spreading across multiple states. 17 police departments near military installations, all with documented patterns of targeting service members of color. But that's not all. She pulled out a second document. This one showing financial transactions. Larson and at least 12 other officers received payments from this shell company. Freeman studied the documents with the analytical precision that had defined his military career. Patriot Shield Security Consultants. Interesting name for a harassment operation. Special Agent Chin entered with General Washington, both carrying additional files. It gets worse, Chin announced without preamble. Patriot Shield is funded through a network of donors who also support several known white nationalist organizations. We've identified at least 3 police chiefs who were aware of these connections. General Washington's expression was grim. The military implications are serious. These targeted harassment campaigns specifically focused on officers of color in intelligence and security positions. It appears the goal was to discourage their continued service or promotion. Freeman absorbed this information with growing concern. So my shooting wasn't just about racial profiling or my specific report. It was part of a broader strategy to undermine diversity in military leadership. Chen nodded. Exactly. And your daughter's apartment complex was no coincidence either. This caught Trinity's attention. What do you mean? Chen opened another file. Your roommate, Jessica Mercer. Her father is on the board of the Westlake Pines Property Association, which funds the local police foundation. Trinity sat down heavily. Jessica? But we've been friends since orientation. She recommended the apartment to me. Freeman reached for his daughter's hand. That's how they tracked my visits. They knew exactly when I would be there. The realization that her friendship had been manipulated hit Trinity hard. She was reporting on me? On us? Chen's expression softened slightly. We don't know if she was aware of the full operation. We're bringing her in for questioning today. The conference room door opened again, admitting a technician with a laptop. Agent Chen, we've completed the analysis of the microfilm from the desk. You're going to want to see this immediately. The technician set up the laptop, displaying a series of scanned documents. These are internal police department memos dating back 7 years, outlining what they called the Community Preservation Initiative. It established protocols for identifying and deterring disruptive elements in affluent communities. The clinical language barely disguised the racist intent behind the policies. Freeman leaned forward, scanning the documents with growing disgust. This is systematic exclusion disguised as community policing. And they specifically targeted military personnel who filed complaints. The technician nodded. The most recent documents show they were tracking your movements for months, Colonel. They knew about your Pentagon report before you even began the final draft. Trinity's legal training immediately spotted the implications. This isn't just civil rights violations anymore. This is conspiracy against the federal government, obstruction of justice, and potentially espionage if they were accessing classified military information. General Washington turned to Chen. We need to brief the Attorney General and Secretary of Defense immediately. This goes well beyond local police departments. Freeman attempted to stand but winced at the pain in his chest. Trinity moved quickly to support him. Dad, you need to rest. You're still recovering. Freeman waved off her concern. This is more important than my comfort, Trinity. We need to understand how deep this goes and who else might be compromised. A junior agent entered with an urgent expression. Agent Chen, Captain Burton of Westlake Pines Police is requesting a deal. He says he has information about elected officials involved in the conspiracy. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Chen recovered first. Bring him to interview room 1. I want to hear what he has to say before making any decisions about deals. As Chen left to handle this new development, Trinity turned to her father. This is bigger than we thought, isn't it? Freeman nodded solemnly. Much bigger. And more dangerous. These people have resources and connections we're only beginning to understand. General Washington placed a hand on Freeman's shoulder. Which is why we're increasing your security detail, Elijah. Until we identify everyone involved, both you and Trinity remain at risk. Freeman's military mind was already calculating scenarios. Trinity should return to Walter Reed with me. The secure housing on base is our best option right now. Trinity shook her head firmly. I'm not hiding, Dad. I'm a lawyer. And this is exactly why I went to law school. I need to be part of this investigation. Their standoff was interrupted by Chen's return, her expression grave. Burton is talking. He's implicated the mayor of Westlake Pines and 2 state legislators in the conspiracy. According to him, they'd been using police departments as instruments of racial exclusion for years, with the specific targeting of military personnel being a recent escalation. Freeman processed this information with the strategic analysis that had marked his military career. They saw military officers of color as particularly threatening because we have authority and resources to fight back. Chen nodded. Exactly. And your report threatened to expose the entire operation. She turned to Trinity. Your roommate Jessica just arrived for questioning. Would you like to observe? Trinity straightened her shoulders, her father's determination evident in her posture. Yes. I need to know if our friendship was ever real or if I was just a target from the beginning. As Trinity left with Chin, General Washington turned to Freeman. This case will change how we protect our personnel, Elijah. Your sacrifice has already set in motion reforms throughout the military and beyond. Freeman's expression remained solemn. It shouldn't take getting shot for America to address these issues. General. How many others without my resources or connections have suffered without recourse? Washington had no answer for that uncomfortable truth. Instead, he helped Freeman to his feet. Let's go hear what Burton has to say about his political connections. If elected officials are involved in targeting military personnel, this becomes a matter of national security. Freeman nodded, straightening his civilian clothes with military precision. And justice. Don't forget that part, General. This has always been about justice. As they made their way toward the interview rooms, Freeman reflected on how his simple birthday visit to his daughter had uncovered a nationwide conspiracy. The antique desk that had been meant as a gift of family history had instead become a vehicle for exposing America's ongoing struggle with racism. Even among those sworn to protect and defend the Constitution, his wound throbbed with each step, a physical reminder of how close he had come to becoming another statistic. But unlike too many others, Colonel Elijah Freeman had the position, resources, and evidence to fight back. And fight he would, not just for himself, but for every service member who had faced similar discrimination without the power to challenge it. The congressional hearing room buzzed with tension as Colonel Elijah Freeman, now recovered enough to wear his full dress uniform with decorations, took his seat at the witness table. 6 months had passed since the shooting in Westlake Pines, and what had begun as a seemingly isolated incident of racial profiling had expanded into one of the most significant civil rights investigations of the decade. The chamber fell silent as Representative Eleanor Martinez, chairwoman of the House Committee on Oversight and Reform, called the session to order. This committee convenes today to examine evidence of systematic discrimination against military personnel of color by police departments nationwide, and the apparent conspiracy to conceal these practices. She turned her attention to Freeman. Colonel, we thank you for your testimony today, and for your service both in uniform and in bringing these matters to light. Freeman acknowledged her words with a respectful nod. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I appear before you not only as a victim of this discrimination but as a witness to its broader impact on our military readiness and national values. The first hour of testimony established the basic facts of Freeman's shooting, supported by video evidence that had now been viewed by millions across the country. The footage showing Officer Larson drawing his weapon and firing without legitimate provocation had become a rallying point for police reform advocates nationwide. Trinity Freeman sat in the row directly behind her father, her legal pad filled with notes. In the months since the shooting, she had transitioned from law student to key member of the joint DOJ military task force investigating the conspiracy. Her unique perspective as both a lawyer and a family member providing valuable insights. Representative Martinez directed the hearing toward its central purpose. Colonel Freeman, please describe for the committee the report you were preparing before the shooting incident, and how it relates to the evidence we're examining today. Freeman straightened in his chair, his military bearing evident even after months of recovery. 3 years ago, I was assigned to examine patterns of interaction between military personnel and local police departments surrounding bases and facilities. What began as a routine assessment quickly revealed disturbing trends. He activated the presentation screen, displaying a map with markers indicating documented incidents. My team identified over 200 cases where service members of color experienced harassment, unlawful detention, excessive force, or other civil rights violations while in communities near their assigned bases. The data visualization shifted to show statistical breakdowns. Black and Hispanic service members were 6 times more likely to experience these incidents than their white counterparts, even when controlling for all other factors. A murmur ran through the chamber as the scope of the discrimination became clear. Freeman continued, his voice steady. More concerning was what we discovered about the organized nature of these incidents. They were not isolated actions by individual officers, but rather reflected systematic policies designed to discourage military personnel of color from residing in or even visiting certain communities. Representative William Chandler, a skeptical voice on the committee, interrupted. Colonel, are you suggesting that police departments were specifically targeting military personnel because of their race? That seems rather far-fetched. Freeman turned to face him directly. Congressman, I am not suggesting it. I am stating it as established fact. Supported by the evidence recovered from Officer Larson's devices, Captain Burton's testimony, and the documents recovered from the antique desk that Officer Larson was so desperate to prevent me from delivering to my daughter. He activated the next slide, displaying internal police memos with highlighted sections. These documents outline what they called the Community Preservation Initiative, a coordinated effort across multiple jurisdictions to maintain the demographic character of certain communities by using aggressive policing against people of color, with specific protocols for handling military personnel who might have the resources to challenge such treatment. The evidence was damning. Communications between police departments showed explicit racial language and strategies for harassment that would be difficult to prove in court. Even more disturbing were the connections to local government officials and property associations that had funded and directed these efforts. As the hearing progressed, testimony from other service members who had experienced similar discrimination added human dimension to the statistics. A Navy lieutenant described being stopped 11 times in 3 months while driving to his children's school. An Air Force captain recounted being handcuffed in front of her neighbors while trying to enter her own home. Throughout it all, Colonel Freeman remained composed, his military discipline evident even as the stories reflected his own experience. During a brief recess, Trinity approached her father. "You're doing great, Dad?" "The committee members are shocked by the evidence." Freeman nodded, taking a sip of water. "Shock isn't enough, Trinity. We need action. Structural change." She smiled, recognizing the determination that had shaped her own life. "It's coming. The Attorney General is announcing the first indictments tomorrow, including 3 mayors and a state senator." When the hearing resumed, Representative Martinez directed questions toward the institutional response. "Colonel Freeman, how has the military addressed these findings since your shooting brought them to public attention?" Freeman's response was measured but pointed. "The Department of Defense has established the Civil Rights Protection Protocol for all service members, providing direct federal reporting channels and response teams for incidents of discrimination. Additionally, military housing allowances have been adjusted to ensure personnel aren't economically forced to live in communities where they face harassment." He paused, then added, "However, these are responses to symptoms, not cures for the underlying disease. That requires broader societal and legal reform." As the hearing entered its final phase, Representative Chandler, still appearing skeptical, asked the question that many had avoided. "Colonel, given your distinguished service record and current position, do you believe your experience is truly representative of what other Black Americans face? Aren't you somewhat insulated by your rank and status?" The chamber fell silent, the question hanging in the air. Freeman took a moment before responding, his voice quiet but carrying throughout the room. "Congressman, when Officer Larson approached my vehicle that day, he didn't see Lieutenant Colonel Elijah Freeman with 28 years of decorated service. He didn't see my security clearance or Pentagon position. He saw a black man in a community where he believed I didn't belong. Freeman touched the spot on his chest where the bullet had entered. My uniform didn't protect me. My rank didn't protect me. My constitutional rights didn't protect me. The only thing that saved my life was my foresight in documenting the very discrimination I eventually experienced myself. He leaned forward, his gaze steady. So yes, Congressman, my experience is absolutely representative. The only difference is that I had the resources and position to ensure that my shooting couldn't be buried or explained away like so many others. The room remained silent as the weight of his words settled over the proceedings. Representative Martinez finally spoke. Thank you, Colonel Freeman. Your testimony today will help shape legislation that we are introducing next week, the Military Civil Rights Protection Act, which will establish federal oversight of police departments and military-adjacent communities, and create swift accountability measures for civil rights violations. As the hearing concluded, photographers captured what would become an iconic image: Colonel Freeman in full dress uniform, hand over heart, as he re-examined the oath he had taken decades earlier to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. The antique desk that had carried hidden evidence was now displayed in the National Museum of African American History and Culture, a powerful symbol of both ongoing discrimination and the fight against it. Trinity joined her father as they exited the hearing room, reporters calling questions from behind security barriers. Are you ready for tomorrow's testimony at Officer Larson's trial? She asked quietly. Freeman nodded, his expression resolute. I've been ready my entire life, Trinity. This isn't just about what happened to me. It's about ensuring it doesn't happen to the next generation of service members. As they walked together toward the waiting vehicles, father and daughter represented both the painful reality of American racism and the determined resistance against it. The conspiracy had been exposed, but the work of dismantling it had only just begun. 1 year to the day after the shooting in Westlake Pines, Colonel Elijah Freeman stood at the podium in the Rose Garden of the White House, the spring sunshine glinting off the eagles on his dress uniform. Behind him, the President of the United States waited to sign the Military Civil Rights Protection Act, legislation that had moved through Congress with unprecedented bipartisan support following the revelations of systematic discrimination against service members of color. Freeman surveyed the assembled crowd, noting the faces of fellow officers who had shared their own stories of harassment and discrimination during the nationwide reckoning that had followed his shooting. In the front row sat Trinity, now a full-time attorney with the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division, the youngest lawyer ever appointed to such a position. Her work on the task force investigating police departments had been instrumental in shaping the legislation about to be signed. 1 year ago, Freeman began, his voice carrying across the hushed garden, I was delivering a birthday gift to my daughter. That simple act, undertaken by a father who happens to be black in a community that perceived me as an intruder, nearly cost me my life. He touched the spot on his chest where the bullet had entered, a gesture that had become familiar to millions who had watched his congressional testimony. What Officer Scott Larson could not have known when he pulled the trigger was that his action would expose a nationwide conspiracy to use police powers not to protect and serve, but to exclude and intimidate. Freeman paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the gathering. Today, Officer Larson begins serving a 15-year federal sentence for civil rights violations and conspiracy against the United States. Former Police Chief Harold Burton, who turned state's evidence, is in a witness protection program after testifying against a network of officials who directed these discriminatory policies. And 17 police departments across the country are now operating under federal consent decrees requiring comprehensive reform. The audience applauded, but Freeman raised his hand for silence. These consequences represent accountability, but they are not justice. True justice requires transformation, not merely punishment. True justice requires that we address the underlying biases and structures that made such discrimination possible in the first place. He gestured to the antique desk now positioned symbolically beside the signing table. This desk, intended as a birthday gift for my daughter, became instead a vessel for truth. The evidence it contained exposed not just individual acts of racism but systemic policies designed to maintain racial hierarchies in communities across our nation. Freeman's voice grew stronger as he continued. The Military Civil Rights Protection Act being signed today creates new federal oversight of police interactions with service members. It establishes clear reporting channels and swift intervention protocols. It provides resources for training and community engagement. But most importantly, it acknowledges a painful truth: that those who serve our nation in uniform are not exempt from the racism that continues to plague American society. The President stepped forward to stand beside Freeman. A gesture of solidarity that photographers captured for the next day's front pages. Colonel Freeman's courage in documenting these abuses before he himself became a victim demonstrates the highest ideals of military service, the President stated. This legislation bears his name because his foresight and sacrifice made it possible. As the signing ceremony concluded, Trinity joined her father at the podium, their resemblance striking in both appearance and determination. Together they had established the Freeman Justice Initiative, a non-profit organization providing legal representation to service members experiencing discrimination. What had begun as a personal trauma had transformed into a national movement. Later that evening, in a quiet moment at the celebration reception, Trinity found her father standing alone, looking out over the Washington Monument illuminated against the night sky. "Penny for your thoughts, Dad?" she asked, joining him at the window. Freeman smiled softly. "I was thinking about your mother. About how proud she would be of you." Trinity leaned her head against his shoulder. "Of us. She would be proud of us." Freeman nodded. "I keep wondering what would have happened if I hadn't documented everything. If I hadn't prepared for the worst. How many others have faced what I faced without the resources to fight back?" Trinity straightened, her expression serious. "That's why our work isn't finished. The legislation is just the beginning." Freeman turned to face the room full of military officers, government officials, and civil rights advocates who had gathered to celebrate the day's achievement. "You know what gives me hope, Trinity? Look around this room. Every person here represents someone who refused to accept discrimination as inevitable. Each one is committed to continuing this fight." Trinity followed his gaze, recognizing faces that had become allies over the past year. "The system tried to silence you, to make you another statistic. Instead, you changed the system." Freeman shook his head slightly. "Not alone. Never alone." As the evening progressed, Freeman found himself face to face with Officer Kevin Reeves, who had been present at the shooting and whose testimony had been crucial in the case against Larson. Reeves had subsequently resigned from the Westlake Pines Police Department and become an advocate for reform within law enforcement. "Colonel Freeman," Reeves extended his hand, uncertainty in his expression. "I wanted to thank you for acknowledging my testimony in your speech today." Freeman took the offered hand firmly. "Truth deserves recognition, Officer Reeves. Your courage in speaking out against your fellow officer cost you your career but helped change the system." Reeves nodded solemnly. "I keep thinking about that day. How I stood by while Larson escalated the situation. I should have intervened sooner." Freeman considered his words carefully. "The test of character isn't whether we make mistakes, but how we respond to them. You chose truth when it mattered most." Their conversation was interrupted by an announcement that the Freeman Justice Initiative had just received a $20 million grant to expand its work nationwide. Cheers erupted throughout the room, with Trinity being called forward to speak about the organization's plans. As Freeman watched his daughter address the gathering with confidence and passion, he reflected on the journey that had brought them here. What had begun as a simple birthday gift delivery had exposed a conspiracy reaching into the highest levels of local government. His military training had prepared him to document the discrimination he witnessed, but nothing could have prepared him for experiencing it himself in such a violent way. Yet from that moment of trauma had come transformation not just for him and Trinity, but potentially for countless service members who would now have protections and recourse they previously lacked. The antique desk that had carried hidden evidence now stood as a symbol in the National Museum of African American History and Culture. A reminder that the struggle for civil rights continued even for those who served the nation in uniform. As the celebration continued around him, Freeman straightened his shoulders with military precision, the habit of a lifetime. The scar on his chest would always remind him of how close he had come to becoming another statistic. Another black man whose death would be justified and forgotten. Instead, his name was now attached to legislation that might prevent others from facing the same discrimination. It wasn't victory. Not yet. But it was progress, hard-won and hopefully lasting. What happened to Colonel Freeman could have ended like so many other stories of racial injustice, buried under official narratives and systemic indifference. Instead, it sparked a movement for accountability and change, proving that preparation and documentation could transform personal tragedy into collective progress. Has this story changed your perspective on how discrimination can affect anyone, regardless of their status or position? Comment below with your thoughts. If you believe stories like Colonel Freeman's need to be told, please like, subscribe, and share this video. Together, we can continue the important conversation about justice and equality in America. Thank you for watching, and remember, change begins with awareness but succeeds through action. Colonel Freeman's story illuminates powerful truths about racism in America. First, no level of achievement, education, or service can fully shield people of color from discrimination. Despite Freeman's distinguished military career and intelligence position, he was still seen as a threat simply for existing in a space where some believed he didn't belong. Second, preparation and documentation are essential weapons against injustice. Freeman's foresight in gathering evidence before becoming a victim himself transformed a potentially tragic incident into a catalyst for systemic change. His meticulous documentation provided irrefutable proof that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. Third, racist systems rely on silence and isolation. When victims lack resources or connections to fight back, injustice persists unchallenged. Freeman's position and planning broke this cycle, demonstrating how privilege can be leveraged to create wider change. Fourth, transformation requires more than individual accountability. While Larson's conviction brought necessary consequences, true justice demanded addressing the underlying structures that enabled discrimination in the first place. Finally, Freeman's story reminds us that progress, while difficult, is possible. Through strategic action, documentation, and perseverance, even deeply entrenched systems of oppression can be challenged and reformed. The path to justice is neither quick nor easy, but with preparation and determination, change is achievable. Has discrimination ever touched your life or someone you know? We want to hear your story in the comments below. Have you witnessed systemic bias in institutions that are meant to protect everyone equally? How did you respond? If Colonel Freeman's courage inspired you, please hit that like button to help this important story reach more viewers. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful narratives that expose injustice and celebrate those fighting for change. Share this video with someone who needs to understand that racism persists even for those who serve our country with honor. Together, we can build awareness that leads to meaningful action. Thank you for bearing witness to Colonel Freeman's journey from victim to changemaker. May his story inspire each of us to document, speak up, and stand firm against injustice wherever we encounter it.